the quiet that followed. The house did not feel like a place of mourning. It felt like something had exhaled. Clara Whitmore stood at the kitchen table, her hands resting on the worn wood as morning light crept through the thin curtains. Dust moved in the beam of sunlight, slow and aimless, as though time itself had forgotten to continue. 3 days had passed since the funeral, yet nothing inside her resembled grief. There were no tears waiting to fall, no sharp ache of absence, only a strange, hollow stillness. She lifted Henry's coffee mug from the counter. It was still where the neighbors had placed it after washing the dishes brought for condolences. No one had dared move his things. The town believed preservation was respect. Clara knew better. She opened the cupboard and placed the mug inside, not carefully, not ceremonially, just away. Outside, the ranch stretched in long, pale fields, winter grass bending under a restless wind. The fences Henry had promised to mend rattled faintly. He had always promised repairs. He had always promised many things. Clara tied her hair back and stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath her boots, the sound loud in the morning quiet. This had been Henry's kingdom once, a place he managed, controlled, spoke of with pride in town gatherings. Yet he had rarely stood still long enough to notice it. Or her. She walked toward the barn, pulling her coat tighter against the cold. The animals needed feeding. The trough needed clearing. Life, unlike mourning, did not wait to be invited. Inside the barn, she worked methodically, each movement practiced from years of necessity rather than partnership. Marriage had not been shared labor. It had been parallel existence. Henry handled appearances. Clara handled everything else. As she hauled a bale of hay across the floor, she paused, not from exhaustion, but from the unfamiliar sensation of choosing her own pace. No voice called instructions. No boots approached behind her. No expectation lingered in the air. The silence was not empty. It was spacious. That realization unsettled her more than sorrow would have. By midday, Clara rode into town for supplies. It was unavoidable. Flour, nails, kerosene. The ordinary things that tethered a person to routine. The general store bell chimed as she entered, and conversation stopped in that polite, suffocating way reserved for widows. Mrs. Whitmore, the shopkeeper said gently, as though she might break if addressed too firmly. "Let me know if you need anything delivered." "I won't," Clara replied. "I can manage." He nodded, though he clearly did not believe her. Sympathy followed her through the aisles like an unwanted shadow. Women touched her arm. Men removed their hats. Their kindness pressed against her ribs until breathing felt like effort. They mourned Henry loudly, reverently, speaking of his accomplishments, his character, his presence. Clara listened to stories about a husband she had never quite known. On her way out, Margaret Hale intercepted her near the hitching post. Margaret's sharp eyes missed little. They carried neither cruelty nor comfort, only scrutiny. "You shouldn't be alone out there yet," Margaret said. "Grief settles heavier when the casseroles stop coming." Clara secured her supplies to the saddle. "I'll take my chances." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "People will be watching," she added quietly. "A widow's conduct becomes town memory." Clara met her gaze. "Then they'll remember I kept the ranch running." "That isn't what I meant." "I know." Clara mounted her horse before more could be said. She did not want guidance. She did not want caution. What she wanted, though she could not yet name it, was distance from every expectation that had shaped her life thus far. The ride home stretched longer than usual, clouds gathering low across the horizon. Wind carried the scent of coming weather. As the ranch came into view, Clara slowed the horse. There was another animal near the fence. A tall bay gelding stood tied to the post, saddlebags worn but well kept. Not one of hers. Not one from any neighboring property. The sight sent a ripple of awareness through her chest. Not fear, not alarm, but intrusion. Someone was here. She dismounted, senses sharpening as she scanned the yard. The barn door stood open. A figure moved within, half-shadowed, lifting one of the loose fence rails as though examining it. A man stepped into the light. He was neither hurried nor apologetic, as though arriving unannounced at a widow's ranch required no explanation. Dust clung to his coat. Travel marked him in small ways. The sun-darkened skin, the deliberate stillness of someone accustomed to long roads and few words. Clara approached, stopping several paces away. "You're on private land." The man glanced at the sagging fence, then back at her. His expression held no challenge, only calm observation. "Looks like it's been needing fixing for a while," he said. "That isn't an invitation." "No," he agreed. "It's an observation." Something in his tone unsettled her. Not boldness, not charm, but the absence of either. He did not look at her with pity. He did not look at her with curiosity. He simply looked, as if measuring what stood before him without assumption. It was the first time since the funeral that someone had done that. "I'm not selling anything," Clara said. "I'm not buying." He gestured toward the road beyond the fields. "Passing through. Storm's coming. Thought I'd ask if there's work enough to earn a night's stay." Clara followed his gaze to the darkening sky. Thunder murmured in the distance. She should have refused. A woman alone did not take in strangers. The town would disapprove. Margaret would certainly hear of it. But Clara looked again at the broken fence rail in his hands, the one Henry had promised, for 2 years, to repair. And for the first time since burying her husband, she felt the faintest stirring of something unfamiliar. Not grief, not relief. Possibility. "What's your name?" she asked. The man set the rail back into place. "Ethan Cole." Clara nodded once, weighing the decision already forming. "Fix the fence," she said. "Then we'll see." As thunder rolled closer across the plains, Clara realized the quiet she had grown used to was about to change, and she did not know whether she wanted it to. The shape of an interruption. By morning, Ethan Cole had repaired more than the fence Clara had pointed out. Clara noticed it before she noticed him. The gate that never closed properly now swung true on its hinges. A loose plank along the corral had been reinforced. Even the water pump, stubborn for months, no longer groaned in protest when she worked the handle. None of the fixes were elaborate. They were simply done quietly, competently, without announcement. She found him near the barn, coiling a length of rope with deliberate care, as though he had no intention of leaving it in disarray for someone else to manage. "You weren't asked to do all that," she said. Ethan shrugged. "Hard to ignore what's right in front of you." Clara studied him, uncertain how to respond. Henry had always required acknowledgement for effort, gratitude delivered like payment owed. Ethan asked for nothing. He did not even pause in his work to see if she approved. That unsettled her more than obligation would have. "You can stay another day," she said, the words emerging before she had fully decided on them. "There's more work if you want it." Ethan gave a single nod. "I figured." The ease of his acceptance felt less like agreement and more like inevitability. They worked through the afternoon in an unspoken rhythm. Clara repaired tack while Ethan reset posts along the western edge of the property. They spoke only when necessary, exchanging brief, practical remarks that carried none of the weight Clara had come to associate with conversation. Yet she found herself aware of him in ways she did not welcome. Not because of what he did, because of what he noticed. "You favor your left hand when you lift," he said at one point, not looking up from the harness he was mending. "Injury." Clara flexed her fingers instinctively. "Old strain. It's nothing. You never let it heal." It was not a question. It was an observation. She felt an unexpected flash of irritation. "I had work to do." Ethan glanced at her then, his expression unreadable. "You still do." The remark lingered long after he returned his attention to the leather strap. Clara could not decide whether he had meant the ranch or something else entirely. Toward evening, clouds gathered again, though no storm followed. The sky settled into a dull gray that flattened the land into muted tones. Clara prepared supper out of habit, setting 2 plates on the table before realizing what she had done. She almost removed one. Instead, she left it. They ate in near silence, the scrape of utensils louder than words. Yet the quiet did not resemble the suffocating stillness she had known with Henry. That silence had been filled with avoidance, with things unsaid because they could not be bridged. This quiet felt inhabited. "You don't ask questions," Clara said finally. Ethan looked up. "You want me to?" Most people would have asked by now. About my husband. About why I'm alone. I know why you're alone, he replied. The certainty in his voice tightened something in her chest. You couldn't. He set his fork down. A man doesn't leave a place like this in such disrepair unless he stopped caring about it long before he died. Clara's breath caught. The words were not cruel. They were not even harsh. They were accurate. You didn't know him, she said, though the protest sounded weaker than intended. No, Ethan agreed. But I know absence when I see it. The statement settled between them, undeniable and strangely relieving. Clara had spent years pretending Henry's distance was temporary, explainable, forgivable. Hearing it named so plainly felt like stepping into cold air after a long confinement. She should have been offended. Instead, she felt understood. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the walls in restless sweeps. Clara rose to clear the dishes, aware of Ethan's presence behind her as he carried his plate to the basin without being asked. He washed it, dried it, and set it aside with the care of someone accustomed to leaving no trace. You move like you're already gone, she said. That's usually how it works. And this time, Ethan met her gaze briefly. That depends on whether there's reason to stay. The simplicity of the answer made her pulse quicken. There was no persuasion in it, no charm, just the quiet acknowledgement that choices existed. Clara turned back to the counter, gripping its edge as conflicting thoughts pressed in. The town would not approve of a stranger lingering at her ranch. Margaret's warning echoed in memory. A widow was expected to preserve, not change. To endure, not invite. Yet as she looked around the kitchen, the same walls, the same narrow life she had lived for years, she realized nothing about preserving it felt honest anymore. Ethan stepped onto the porch, giving her space without needing to be told. Through the window, she watched him check the sky, his silhouette steady against the dimming horizon. He did not belong here. That was precisely why his presence felt so disruptive. Clara understood then that the conflict rising inside her had little to do with propriety and everything to do with recognition. Ethan's arrival had not introduced something new. It had exposed something that had long been waiting. When he came back inside, she spoke before doubt could intervene. There's more work tomorrow, she said. If you're willing. Ethan removed his hat, setting it on the table. I'll be here. The answer should have sounded ordinary. Instead, it marked the moment Clara realized his staying was no longer about the ranch, and neither was her asking. The line neither of them named. The storm arrived without ceremony. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened into a low ceiling of iron-gray clouds, pressing down on the plains until even the horizon seemed to vanish. Wind moved across the ranch in long, steady currents, bending the grass and rattling every loose hinge Ethan had not yet repaired. Clara watched it gather from the porch, arms folded tightly against the chill. Storms had never unsettled her before. They were practical things, whether to prepare for, not fear. Yet this one carried a strange tension, as though it were less a change in season and more a shift in the shape of her life. You should bring the horses in, Ethan said, appearing beside her with a quietness that had already become familiar. I already did, she replied. He nodded, unsurprised. Then we waited out. Thunder rolled across the sky, distant but deliberate. They secured the last of the barn doors together, working quickly as the first drops of rain began to fall, slow, heavy impacts that darkened the dust beneath their boots. Within minutes, the storm broke open in earnest, rain sweeping sideways under the force of the wind. Inside the house, the sudden absence of sound from the outside world felt unnatural. The walls held the storm at bay, leaving only the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Clara lit a lamp when the daylight disappeared entirely. The small flame pushed back the darkness just enough to define the room. Shadows gathered in the corners, deepening the sense of enclosure. We may lose power, she said. Ethan leaned against the far wall, hat in hand. Wouldn't be the worst thing. She glanced at him. You don't mind being stranded? I've spent most of my life that way. The remark carried no complaint. It was simply fact. For a time, neither of them spoke. The storm filled the silence with its restless energy, as though nature itself had taken over the conversation they avoided. Clara tried to busy herself with small tasks, folding a cloth, adjusting the lamp wick. But the effort felt transparent. She was aware of him, not as a guest, not as a worker, as a presence she could neither dismiss nor define. "You don't talk about where you're from," she said at last. "There isn't much to tell. Everyone has somewhere." Ethan considered that, then answered, "I've had places, never one that asked me to stay." Clara absorbed the words, recognizing the echo of her own experience in them. She had lived in one place all her life, yet it had never truly asked for her, either. The realization loosened something she had held tightly for years. "My husband," she began, then stopped. The word felt formal, almost inaccurate. Henry believed routine was the same as devotion. If things appeared right, he assumed they were. Ethan did not interrupt. "He spent more time in town than here," she continued. "Meetings, dinners, business that never seemed to involve me. People admired him. I think they still do." "And you?" Ethan asked quietly. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I learned how to live beside someone without ever being seen by them." The storm surged louder, as if punctuating the confession. "I told myself that was marriage," she said. "Endurance, obligation, silence." Ethan's gaze remained steady, neither sympathetic nor judging. "And now?" Clara met his eyes for the first time since she had begun speaking. "Now I don't know what to call it. Freedom feels suspicious." Lightning flashed across the windows, filling the room with stark white light before plunging it back into shadow. The brief illumination left them standing closer than either had intended. Neither stepped away. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no sudden movement, no declaration. Only the quiet awareness of distance, shrinking to something fragile. Clara noticed the details she had tried not to see. The steadiness of Ethan's hands, the patience in the way he waited rather than reached. He made no attempt to close the space between them. That restraint made the choice hers, and that frightened her more than if he had insisted. "I don't want pity," she said, though the words sounded less certain than she intended. "That's good," Ethan replied, "because I don't offer it." The honesty of the answer struck deeper than comfort would have. Clara realized then that what stood between them was not temptation, but recognition. He saw her exactly as she was, uncertain, conflicted, no longer willing to disappear into expectation. She reached for the table to steady herself, but her hand brushed against his instead. The contact was brief, accidental, irreversible. Both of them stilled. Clara felt the weight of it, not passion, not urgency, but the unmistakable crossing of something she had once believed immovable. The boundary was not physical. It was the quiet acknowledgement that she wanted to remain where she stood. She withdrew her hand slowly, breath uneven. "This shouldn't be happening," she said. Ethan did not argue. No, but he did not move away. Outside, the storm began to ease, rain softening into a steady hush. The worst of it had passed, though the air remained charged with what it had carried in. Clara stepped back, needing distance to think, yet aware that distance would not undo what had already changed. "We should get some rest," she said. Ethan inclined his head. "Morning comes whether we're ready or not." She moved toward the hallway, pausing before the lamp. For a moment, she considered extinguishing it, returning the house to darkness, to the familiar shape of her old life. Instead, she turned the flame higher. Behind her, Ethan remained where he was, neither staying nor leaving. And Clara understood, with a certainty that both unsettled and steadied her, that whatever awaited them in the morning would no longer resemble the life she had known. The storm had passed. The consequences had not. What remains when the storm is gone? Morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost deliberate. The storm had washed the land clean. Every fence post, every blade of grass, every distant rise of earth stood sharply defined beneath a pale, widening sky. The air carried that rare stillness that follows upheaval, a quiet that was not empty but settled. Clara stood at the window, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she had not yet tasted. She had slept little, not from regret, and not from fear, but from the unfamiliar act of thinking without restraint. Behind her, the house was unchanged. The same table, the same worn floors, the same walls that had once seemed to close inward with expectation. Yet nothing felt arranged the way it had before. Ethan was already outside. She could see him through the glass, checking the latch on the repaired gate, testing it once, then again, as though making certain the work would hold after the storm's strain. He did not look toward the house. He did not seek her out. He behaved like a man preparing to leave. Clara set the cup down. The realization did not surprise her. It followed naturally from everything he had shown her. Ethan was not someone who inserted himself where he was not asked to remain. He repaired what was broken. Then he moved on. That had always been the arrangement. Only now did she understand that she was the one who had changed its terms. She stepped outside, the damp earth cool beneath her boots. Ethan straightened when he heard her approach, his expression calm, already resolved. "The fence will hold," he said. "Shouldn't give you trouble again." Clara looked at the line of posts stretching across the field. "You're leaving today." It was not a question. Ethan rested his hands on the top rail. Storms passed. No reason to linger. The words were practical, sensible, exactly what she should have expected. Clara felt the weight of them nonetheless. "And if there were a reason?" she asked. Ethan met her gaze, measuring the question rather than answering it. "That would have to come from you." There it was again, that refusal to decide for her. No persuasion, no promise, just a space for choice. Clara realized how rarely she had been given that space. For years, decisions had been shaped by Henry's preferences, by the town's approval, by the quiet pressure to maintain appearances. Even her grief had been prescribed to her, outlined in casseroles and condolences. Now, standing in the clear aftermath of the storm, she felt the unfamiliar weight of deciding something entirely for herself. "I was faithful to my marriage," she said slowly, "but not because it was whole, because I believed enduring it was the same as honoring it." Ethan listened without interruption. "I don't know what people will say," she continued. "I don't know if they'll understand. But I do know I won't return to living like this place is a monument instead of a home." Wind moved across the fields, lighter now, carrying none of yesterday's force. Ethan glanced toward the barn, toward the open land beyond it. Staying would mean something different than passing through. "I know. It wouldn't be easy. It never was." The simplicity of her answer settled whatever uncertainty remained between them. Ethan nodded once, not in triumph, not even in agreement, but in acceptance of the responsibility she was offering. "Then we'd best get to work," he said. Clara almost laughed at that, not because it was humorous, but because it was so plainly right. Nothing about what lay ahead would be solved by declarations. It would be built the same way the fence had been repaired, piece by piece, deliberately. Later that afternoon, she entered Henry's study for the first time since the funeral. The room still smelled faintly of tobacco and paper. Ledgers remained stacked on the desk, their neat columns recording a life of transactions and obligations. On the far wall hung Henry's portrait, formal and composed, exactly as the town preferred to remember him. Clara stood there for a long moment considering it. She did not feel anger. She did not feel sorrow, only distance. Reaching up, she removed the portrait from its hook. The wall beneath it was lighter, protected from years of shadow. She carried the frame to the closet and set it inside, not hidden, not destroyed, simply no longer presiding over the room. When she opened the curtains, sunlight flooded inward, illuminating dust that had gone undisturbed for too long. The space looked different already. By evening, the ranch carried new sounds, the measured strike of a hammer, the low murmur of conversation, the ordinary rhythm of shared labor. Nothing about it was dramatic. Nothing announced itself as transformation. Yet Clara felt it in every movement. This was no longer a place preserved out of obligation. It was becoming something lived in. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, she paused at the fence line beside Ethan. The repairs stretched ahead of them, unfinished but promising structure rather than decay. "You know," she said, watching the light settle over the fields, "the quiet doesn't feel the same anymore." Ethan followed her gaze. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." The silence that fell between them held no emptiness now. It carried intention, effort, the beginning of something neither of them rushed to name. And as the last light faded, Clara understood that what she had once mistaken for the end of her life had only been the closing of one door. The rest remained unwritten.